When the gun control debate happened this legislative session, something rather unusual happened. Every sheriff in Colorado said these are not good bills and collectively came out against that. One of the leaders of that pack was Sheriff Maketa from El Paso. Terry, thanks for joining us.
Oh, you bet. It's a pleasure to be here.
I want to get into this because I've lived here nearly all my life, and in past times when there were gun control measures coming forward, sometimes law enforcement would go in the opposite direction, including some sheriffs and including some Republicans. This time around, when it came to what sounded like a good bill, the background check bill, but also this really silly magazine ban bill, every sheriff in Colorado in unison stood up and said, not just no, but hell no. How did that happen?
You know, I think it was really just a simple matter that we looked at the bills. And the titles, although sound very attractive and pleasing and so forth, and then the proponents' reasons for them made sense. But when you read the details, it really made it impossible for, number one, law enforcement to enforce. And number two, I think there's an overwhelming feeling among the sheriffs that we're targeting or have the potential to really have a negative consequence among law-abiding citizens. And that shouldn't be the focus of any legislation. And when we tried to work with the sponsors and those that were pushing them and point those flaws out, they didn't want to hear it. And I think that's what really was the core of this rallying among the sheriffs.
The president came in, and behind him stood police officers and cadets. And he gave the impression that law enforcement is thrilled by these changes in Colorado. But at the same time, there was a group of sheriffs who said, no, we don't want that. Why? What's different? I understand that I think maybe a lot of people don't get this, sheriffs like you are directly elected. You're not appointed by a board. There's no mayor or city council or city manager that you need to answer to. You answer directly to the people. Does that make a difference?
Oh, absolutely. I think it does, because I think sheriffs tend to be more connected to their community and those that elect them. Because of that election process, the interaction throughout a campaign, you truly do understand what people's concerns are. And there are a lot of police chiefs that side with us. Their organization came out in support of these bans, but it's surprising how many chiefs have called not only myself but other sheriffs and said, we agree with you, these are bad bills and they're targeting the wrong population. But having said that, chiefs are appointed. And you know, you have to stay in step with that person that is your employer who appoints you. And in many times, it's a non-law enforcement person. They have little experience with laws and the enforcement of those laws, or even rights. They're appointed by an elected body in many cases, and I think that's the real distinct difference.
You're from El Paso County. Come on, you guys like guns. I live in Boulder. My sheriff, Joe Pelly, also joined you guys in saying this was a bad idea. The sheriff of Adams County, who's a Democrat, other Democrats came out. I've never seen that happen before. How unusual is that?
Well, I don't know that it's unusual, except that it's not a partisan issue. I think there are those that would like it to be purely partisan politics, but it's not. It's about common sense, and it's about really targeting the offenders that we're trying to target. If we're trying to prevent mass shootings, you don't pass laws that have a greater impact on law-abiding citizens than those offenders. Let's zero in, and I think it's that common interpretation that is really joining across party lines and saying this doesn't make sense. These laws don't make sense, and they're not going to hit the mark they're promised.
Well, let me press you on these. Let's go over a couple of these laws and why law enforcement is not thrilled about them. Let's take the magazine ban, which I think was the most egregious of them. And if you're a layperson, you look back and go, listen, what do you need more than 15 rounds for? I used to be a guy like that. I used to be a guy who didn't like guns. So why do you need more than 15 rounds? What's wrong with this bill? It sounds pretty innocuous. If you have only 15 rounds, it means the guy's got to reload and put in a new magazine while he's out there creating carnage. But yet, you thought this was a terrible idea. Why?
Absolutely. The first thing is it's completely unenforceable. Magazines holding a capacity of more than 15 rounds are so common throughout the United States. And what really bothers me the most is we had a ban on those magazines. And
on a nationwide level, not just on a state
that's
level.
Correct. And every study that came out of either DOJ or the Urban Institute or even the American Journal of Medicine said it was ineffective. And so to now all of a sudden criminalize people because they own something that is so common, and there is no factual basis behind, oh, the person's going to have to reload. Now, I take it a step further and say, why should citizens have to justify their right to own something when they're law-abiding citizens? And it's based on that premise for me personally. But in a broader scope, my deputies and police officers across this state or country cannot simply look at a magazine and say, oh, that was purchased after such and such date. And so to pass that law here in Colorado it's really going to have no effect. It puts law enforcement in this position where there's an expectation to enforce it, but they can't without intruding on people's Fourth and Fifth Amendment rights.
This law was so poorly written. It said that these magazines are outlawed if they can hold more than 15 or if they can be readily converted to hold more than 15. As I demonstrated before, that ain't hard. Magazines need to be cleaned. That means the bases come off, and you can get an extender, you can put in a new spring, you can do all sorts of things. They're all readily converted, almost all of them. And the other part of it, which was just nonsensical, it said if you have one of these before July 1st, you can keep it, but you have to maintain continuous possession, which means if you and I are out target shooting and you want to show me how to use it, you can't. If you're the gun instructor and you want to touch my gun, you can't. If my wife or our girlfriend wants to use my gun, they can. If I take my kid out shooting, we all become criminals the moment it changes hands. How do you enforce
And that's been our point, and it's been portrayed as we're refusing to enforce. You can't enforce that which is unenforceable. And that's the point we've been trying to make. Don't pass laws that are unenforceable. It's really it's disingenuous to the public. And the fact that innocent law-abiding citizens may inadvertently let somebody borrow something or have somebody hold it and secure it while they're on vacation, and it now turns them into lawbreakers and criminals is really an injustice and cracks at the foundation of our justice system.
Talk to me a little bit about the background check bill. Now this one, again, sounds really good. If I go to a gun store or to a gun show and I buy a gun, they do a background check. They check with CBI, Colorado Bureau of Investigations. They see if I'm legal to buy the gun, and they say go ahead and give it to them. But if I sell you a gun personally, if I want to, I can ask CBI, but there's no law saying that I have to go through this to give you my gun. Or if I want to gift it to you, sell it to you, give it to a friend, let them borrow it for a while, I don't need to do that. Why is it a bad idea to make sure that the same check I would get when I buy it the first time is necessary if I sell it to somebody else?
You know, if that's what this bill was about, I think a majority of the sheriffs would be okay with it. And I think the word that has been commonly used is these bills are far overreaching, because this isn't about a transaction or a sale to an unknown person. And I've been on the record saying if that's all this bill did, because Colorado has a universal background check, it has a law to prevent the gun show loophole, as it was termed. It even goes a step further to address the straw purchase, the purchase by a person who can legally purchase a weapon for an individual that cannot. That's against the law, and we see those laws enforced. If this just was limited to, I'm going to sell it to an unknown person, and the law required that they get a background, we wouldn't have a problem with it. I think a majority of the sheriffs would say, okay, we may not like it, but it's okay, it makes sense. But when you start talking about the transfer between, I love to use the example, it's a true story of a friend of mine that serves in the military. He is deployed now and has been since Sunday. I asked him, are you leaving a weapon with your fiance while you're gone? And he said, well, yeah. And I asked her, is that true? She said, absolutely. I would be upset if he didn't. And I said, you guys realize you're breaking the law, because that's where this is overreaching. We're talking about transfers of lifelong friends who may have a malfunction with their firearm, and I let them loan mine because I trust them. I like to think I surround myself with law-abiding citizens, not gangsters and mass shooters.
Letting my neighbor use my .22 rifle when he's out training Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts how to shoot safely. Now, we're all become criminals because I did not perform a background check on him when he was going out doing that. If I have a stepson, I can't will it to him. I mean, it's unwieldy, but the idea is, I'm okay with the idea as well. I want to make sure, how does something like this work without having some sort of massive registration? How would you as a law enforcement official know that I sold somebody a gun unless I could prove it?
And that's what the sheriffs have been saying, is you're passing laws that are unenforceable in the raw form that they exist today, and that the governor has signed them. They cannot be enforced. There's missing elements if you truly stick by these laws. My concern is the public isn't aware how far overreaching they are. They misrepresented them when they titled them universal background check. We have it. That's why people are comfortable with it. But this notion that law enforcement is going to know whether a temporary transfer took place, or you let somebody borrow it, or even in the sale of it, there is no proactive aspect to it because there is no registration. What firearm did you loan? When did you get it? When did it sell?
Why don't we just have registration, and then I can prove that when I sold it to somebody and did a background check.
Well, I think if the sponsor of these bills were honest, they would say this is a stepping stone to statewide registration.
And what's wrong with that?
Well, I think it comes down to a property right. Why should I register a piece of property I have that has of no value or interest to the government?
I do that with my car. I do it with my home.
Well, you do it with your car and your home because of the transaction, and there's usually a third party involved in the home. Otherwise, you don't have to register it with government. You don't have to call them and say, I have purchased a new home. It's a private transaction. With your car, you're registering your car for the rights to operate it on public roadways. If you own 10,000 acres and you're never going to take that car off that acreage, you don't have to register it. And so that's really what it boils down to. And I think we're at a time when everyone knows there's a distrust of government. Why reinforce that distrust with something that the citizens fear?
We've only got a minute left. You sheriffs, I'm putting you all in a group, took a real risk standing up and doing this. Your pay is set by the legislature. When it was found out that some in the legislature decided to twist your arm over this issue, you're the one who screamed foul and said, wait a second, you cannot hold our pay because we don't agree with you. What happened there? And why would you even take that risk? It would have been so easy for you to just be quiet on the issue.
You know, it would have been, and it was twofold. It was the fact of what I witnessed March 4th at the legislature, and I've been up there, if not hundreds of times, right around there. But to see people not be given the opportunity to be involved in the process, and on top of that, receive an email that says, the majority party's upset with sheriffs. We really ought to give in on some of these bills for any chance of a salary bill to succeed. That's wrong.
Isn't that called extortion? You're law enforcement, I don't know. Sheriff, thank you so much, and thank you. Listen for me on KHOW Radio. Check out the Independence Institute. That's independenceinstitute.org, and we'll see you next week.